Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Talking Kotlin. My name is still Sebastian, and today my co-host is Pamela. Hi, Pamela.
Hi, folks. I thought that we were side questing today, not co hosting today, Seb. And today we're really talking about becoming a KMP expert. What does it mean? How do you become one? Why would you want to become one? And what knowledge do you actually need in order to get there? So I've invited some of my favorite experts to come join us today, and let's learn together about becoming this cool technologies experts.
Wow, that's really awesome. Yeah, so let's see who we have here in this panel of Kotlin multi-platform folks. Do you maybe just want to start briefly introducing yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Kostya, and I used to be an Android developer, but now I work on Compose multi-platform team. So I guess that's enough about me.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jake. I work at Cash App on lots of open source stuff and multi-platform Kotlin stuff.
Hi, I'm Tadeas, and I'm a developer at TouchLab, and I'm the co-creator of Sky.
Hi, folks. I'm John. I'm working in a company called Kraken Technology, and part of the Octopus Energy Group, and doing Compose multi-platform development.
Thank you for the introductions, everyone. So I want to just kick it off by just asking, why would you want to become a KMP expert? And I'll focus this on John, not to make you scared, but I'd like to ask John, why would you want to become a KMP expert? What does it mean to you, and why would you want to be one? Why would you encourage other people to also want to be one?
Yeah, I guess there's probably a few reasons. I mean, I can probably talk from my own sort of personal experience, maybe, and kind of extrapolate from that a little bit. But I suppose there was a few reasons, at least, why I ended up going down this path. I'd been through what you might call several code sharing efforts over the years on mobile. Hadn't gone particularly well, and then when I came across Kotlin multi-platform, it immediately appealed as sort of the first sane, pragmatic approach I'd seen in this area. So anyway, I ended up spending more and more time investigating the technology, and then I guess started advocating for it, creating samples, writing articles, giving talks, etc. I think there was probably also a selfish reason as well. I kind of really enjoyed working in KMP, so I felt I was investing in my future career as well, which actually turned out to be the case. Um, and I suppose more generally as well, I mean, we're part of an amazing community, the Kotlin development community, and I found it personally very satisfying to be part of that and feel that you're contributing something towards it as well. So I think they were the kind of key things that I didn't sort of start off kind of aiming to sort of end up at this point, but just sort of organically arrived here. And this was sort of, yeah, they were sort of the key reasons how I ended there.
Did you get obviously like the landscape of multi-platform technologies is quite a wide one, and you mentioned that you say like Kotlin multi-platform is a pretty pragmatic approach. Like, what is there something specific that like attracted you to Kotlin multi-platform in the first place?
Yeah, I guess there's a few things. I mean, I suppose it came at a point where we had been using Kotlin for a couple of years. I guess at that point, I started looking into it around late 2018, and I suppose we've been using Kotlin for a couple of years on Android anyway. And there was that attraction, really enjoyable language to use, very productive language to use. But from the perspective of code sharing, I guess there was a kind of you could call it a risk management aspect of it. I guess people often quote to say that, the advantage of KMP is around risk management, but that sort of key selling point of being able to adopt it, take a small amount of shared code, the classic example of analytics or something, and then sort of build up from there. So the fact that it was pragmatic, as I said, there was this risk management aspect where you could pull in as much or as little as you wanted and sort of incrementally increase your adoption of it at that point. And that was a KMP, of course, at the time. And then obviously it has evolved since then to sort of include CMP. And we have a similar sort of spectrum of sort of code reuse possibilities that exist now across both non-UI and UI code sharing, which is pretty cool to see.
It is really cool to see. Does anybody else want to chime in on they would like to why they consider themselves an expert, and why it's actually something that people would want to be? Why would they want to be a KP expert?
I would also say that one of the nice things about becoming an expert in really any domain is the ability to allow other people on your team to accomplish the thing they want to do, faster, easier, simpler, whatever. And so by virtue of being a cross-platform solution, there's always going to be trade-offs. And I think um, John touched on that the trade-offs that Kotlin make are probably some of the best in terms of, what you get for what you give up. And so, selfishly, again, I really want this to succeed. And so by, taking the time to really level up your knowledge and understanding of how it works across each platform, on each platform, um, the libraries and tools that you need to use, how the IDE stuff works, how deployment works, there's certainly uh, almost no end to the depths of the iceberg on, becoming an expert. But by doing that, you can take away, if you're working on a team of, more than one, you can take away the need to have understanding of the full depth for some of your teammates and allow them to just get the benefits of the cross-platform solution, the code reuse, the ability to take that thing that you wrote once and trivially share it with, your iOS team, your web team, native desktop, or if you're shipping libraries to have the same code run on every single platform you support. And so, yeah, you really, by becoming the expert, you become the person that can allow other people to just not have to be the experts and just focus more on, the task that they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I really like what you said. You really want this to succeed. We also really want this to succeed, by the way. But Tad, do you perhaps have something to add to what John and Jake have said?
Yeah, so I agree with all of that. For me, it's looking at the like this new thing brings in a lot of complexities, and it's a growing ecosystem, right? So there's a lot of things that haven't been done yet, and you really need that expertise to know what that should be and how to build it. So becoming that can help you, like especially if you want to be part of the community. Picking up a growing one is the way to go, and KMP would be the one for me at least.
Yeah, I can add a bit. Additionally, what was said. For me, it's easy because when Kotlin became multi-platform, I noticed that there is no a lot of tooling for that. There is no a lot of libraries, and it is not uh, grown yet. So I decided, okay, so it's a chance to be with the how to say with this shiny train of new feature in the world, and I would like to join it, and I would like to be part of this party. So
So would you say for you it's a matter of like making an impact or like shaping the technology or like you recognizing that it's a cool thing and just wanting to be like surfing that wave?
I wouldn't say I thought about it a lot. For me, it was just something new, unknown, cool feature, cool language, cool. I don't know something, and I didn't know what exactly, but I wanted to join it. I wanted to join to implement something inside and to be expert in a new area.
I think that's really cool, and I think a lot of these motivations, it's super valid, and I think just like it's very cool imagining yourself in a position where you're saying, "All right, I'm the person in a team who helps people achieve things, who helps people unblock things, and who, as a result, makes the product that you're building better." Like that's I think quite an exciting premise. So now let's maybe actually talk a little bit about how you might get there or how you might get on your way to getting there. Um, because of course, there's 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 quite a journey to go through from, okay, like I wrote my first Kotlin multi-platform app and like, I deployed it and it does like a little thing and it runs on my like two little devices. I'm like, okay, I'm vibing with this technology. This is something that I'd like to do more. So what's the next step after that? What do you do to put yourself on the path to becoming an expert?
There's a world where you're a Kotlin multi-platform programmer and you don't really have to think a whole lot about what makes each platform unique. And that's fine. That's sort of like to some degree, um, what Compose multi-platform is like trying to pull off. At least to a large degree, you can just share a bunch of code that renders UI and obviously business logic, networking, all that stuff. But these platforms are unique for a reason. They run in very different contexts and very different places with very different feature sets, or they just even have very different deployment models. Deploying something to my Android phone or an iOS phone is very different than pushing it to the web. Many orders of magnitude of time difference. And so I think once you start realizing that there's these different platforms and that there's ways that you can sort of like honor them and actually expose and integrate with the things that make them unique. There's certainly a lot to be said about just having code written once and sharing it, but really sort of understanding that you're participating in somebody else's ecosystem, and that has been true from the beginning. There's really no platform that like Kotlin is intrinsic to. It doesn't have its own, virtual machine or whatever. It's always running on, somebody else's JVM or somebody else's JavaScript engine. Or with native, you kind of don't really have that, but like it's still, the native execution environment is still specific to your Mac, Linux, or Windows machine. And then even around that, there's just a whole ecosystem of JavaScript capabilities. Android and iOS obviously have huge platform capabilities that you can integrate with, and the desktop is obviously a different machine. Or even not talking about UI whatsoever, but like the server where um, you can really do whatever you want. Just knowing that it's there and switching from I just want to write the thing once and have it run everywhere to I really want to turn this into something that feels appropriate for each platform and honors sort of the capabilities and functionalities that make each one unique, or potentially even that just is why those platforms exist in the first place.
Yeah. So KMP, in a certain way, for me, is sharing things that are sort of common, but allowing the platform still to shine in their own unique ways. I think that's basically what you were saying, Jake, and that's a really true statement. I really like that.
When I was just mobile Android developer, for me it was every time question why we as Android developers do the same things as iOS developers in the same company. Have so different side of view for the same implementation of some scenarios or some I don't know, absolutely the same looking application. We have to do the same things but with the different approaches, and I understand the difference between platforms. As Jake said, there are a lot of differences inside, and when you became Kotlin Multiplatform expert, you have to understand differences to make your work well. So that's what, and the same about the web application, because previously in my companies we had a special team for web development, which were working on the same application, but only for the little bit different form factor in a browser. But again, I wanted to understand what the difference, why they do the same things, different approaches, different architectures, and other things.
Tad, you were a Swift, or at least you did your thesis on Swift. So I'm sure you know a lot about the iOS ecosystem. And tell us, what do you think?
Yeah, so I would kind of do a yes and to especially Jake's answer, where I think that one of the important things is knowing what to put in common code and what you should do still natively, and like that, learning how to do that and when to pick one or the other becomes like one of the difficult decisions that you're gonna need to do. And also learning that you no longer want to, like, when you're Googling for issues, you're not, how do I do something in KMP? You need to do, how do I do something in Android and how do I do something in iOS? And then find the commonalities and abstract them or implement them either in like Kotlin, but natively, or in each of the platform's languages. So basically, like, figuring that out when you're going outside of the common code, it gets more difficult and it requires more expertise.
I suppose just in terms of the actual, sort of the original question a little bit, in terms of next steps and becoming an expert and so forth, I think the word expert is a little bit overloaded sometimes as well. I think it depends on your perspective a little bit. I tend to sort of rephrase it a little. I mean, certainly there's a need to get some proficiency in the area, of course, that you're working on. But I suppose from the perspective of most of us here, I guess there's a sort of more of an advocate, really. And I think it's a case that it has to be something that you're quite passionate. I think we've all kind of expressed that. So this is something we strongly believe in and we're passionate about, and we wanted to succeed. We sort of drove a lot of the efforts that we went through. So it's a combination of those things. But in terms of sort of as a sort of general thing, in terms of people who want to go further, I think that's a sort of a requirement as well. It has to be something you believe in quite strongly as well, and that you want to advocate for as well.
I still hope that, or it's still one of my beliefs that, real and unfeigned enthusiasm is still very much it's infectious, and people do notice it when you get really excited about something, especially when you can then back it up with facts. That oftentimes helps. I'm a bit curious here because very good points, all of them. But I think it's still a very, I mean, obviously, given the format that we have here, and we're kind of having just a chat here, we can't really give people like a 17,000 step tutorial on how to become the next Kotlin multi-platform expert. But I am still curious. Out of the things that you mentioned here, I guess this very strongly goes to both Jake and Tadeas, but of course everyone can chime in. Can you maybe give an example of what like good participation in the local ecosystem might look like? Because again, like the abstraction of saying common code, okay, behaves everywhere, behaves the same everywhere. That's pretty easy to digest. It sounds like it might become a little bit more murky when we're talking about, okay, things are different, and you're kind of supposed to lean into that like a little bit. So what maybe are some differences there that are worth like understanding and maybe also just researching on one's own time?
Yeah, maybe I can set it up a little bit. And so like an example we have that we deal with very frequently is we're performing some code generation of Kotlin that is then compiled in multi-platform contexts and then is interacted with from the sort of intrinsic language of each platform. And so this means, on Android, we're still Kotlin, but on iOS, primarily it's consumed from Swift from iOS developers. And then we have aspirations for the web, but we don't really have web people working yet. But in theory, they would be consuming it from something like a TypeScript. And there's really two challenges. Obviously, just getting signatures and types that look reasonable to these other languages, so that when these iOS developers or hypothetical web developers are interacting with or implementing these interfaces, they don't feel like it's this crazy uncanny valley, like, or just totally wild, different world, that they see and recognize patterns that they're used to, and don't have to really have like a hard mental context switch when they're like, okay, now I'm doing this other thing and talking to this weird system that's coming in and like invading my pure Swift iOS app. It's more like, oh, this is just just implementing an interface on a class that's got some callbacks or whatever. These are the types. They have optionals, or maybe the things that come out are async sequences instead of callbacks or whatever. And that's part of it. And then the other thing that's sort of in relation to that is, if you're doing anything where you're accepting um, sort of types from that language, being able to being able to interact with them in the way that's like correct and honors, the behaviors and requirements even of that language. And so that's like a really challenging thing that we struggle with is, do we use interfaces? Do we use abstract classes? Well, do we have like a type parameter? Then that's a big decision because type parameters don't carry over through interfaces, but they will through classes. And then, do we actually expose flows and try and figure out how to get those consumed from Swift, or do we, do callbacks, or do we do something else? And so there's like an ongoing, and then even just like the life cycle of references, because Kotlin's garbage collector, it lives in its own little world, and Swift's reference counter is also in its own little world. And if you create cycles between them, you basically are going to leak from both sides. And so, how do we define what the contracts of these instances we're creating are? This is a thing that we're like sort of constantly struggling with is how do we make it so these people consuming the Kotlin, they want to leverage, well, most of them want to leverage the reusability aspect, but we don't want to go too far in like bending their will or potentially breaking their will and making them learn to hate this thing rather than hate this thing because of the APIs they interact with, rather than learn to love it for the code reuse that they get from it. And so, yeah, I'd say that's like a big one that is just ongoing. Like it's never a solved problem. It's a thing that we always have to think about and talk about.
Yeah, I agree with that so much. As a Swift developer, coming into KMP was one of the challenges was like this API is ugly. How do we make it better? And it's also like the main reason why we built Sky, to bring that the flows, the suspend, all of that to be closer to Swift as much as possible. But I will also mention like when you're deciding on what to share and what not to share, a great example I keep coming up to is push notifications. So abstracting away push notifications is an interesting challenge because both platforms have it different, and also depends on what you use on the backend. So like if you use Firebase, you put so much into the mix that it makes it really complex. And at that point, you like need to know how to use the platform and need to have the platform experience, and also decide how far do you go with the abstraction. Do you abstract like the whole calls for the push notifications, or just enable push notification API and that's it, and everything else is native?
And when you say native here, you mean Kotlin code written for a specific platform, or then just like straight up written in whatever language that's most home to that ecosystem?
I guess it depends on what you can do and what you can do. Like if you need to use Firebase, for example, as I mentioned, that may be easier to implement in Swift and for iOS and in Kotlin for Android, as opposed to like implementing it all in Kotlin, even like the native part, because then you have to deal with dependencies and Swift package manager dependencies that don't align with CocoaPods dependencies. So all of that kind of opens up what do you choose, and that expertise is what like how you become kind of KMP expert, I think, knowing what to choose and knowing what to ask Google for.
So you really kind of go in your path. You go from probably to like I want to share everything, to later on being like, well, wait a second. There was this whole thing about like pick and choose and like mix and match. And wait a second, I can leverage that to do that. I guess it's just a very, or it takes quite some getting used to um to figure out when to do that right.
My next question really has to do with the library space for KMP developers. So Kostya has this amazing repository of called KMP Awesome on GitHub that everyone should check out for sure, of KMP libraries that he sort of curated and that he likes and thinks that is a valuable contribution to the ecosystem. Kostya, what are your plans for KMP Awesome? What are the hot new libraries that are coming in and that you're seeing are promising?
First of all, I would like to say that I am not inventor of awesome lists in internet. So this kind of repositories presented a lot on the GitHub because I started the repo the time when Kotlin didn't have a lot of choices for some typical scenarios for developers. So I started to collect some libraries to show, first of all, to show that there are libraries for that, first of all, and second, that I wanted to filter some ugly libraries to help new developer who just try new technology. Don't do mistakes with the libraries, because a lot of, for example, I remember the problem with the loggers. Everyone wanted to implement a multi-platform logger, so it was a real problem that every day I heard the question about what logger I have to use for my project. So I wanted just to show maybe 5 loggers for Kotlin Multiplatform, and don't add other loggers to that.
So perhaps you can give us a little shout out of library developers that you are seeing coming up and that you're adding to KMP Awesome, and libraries that you're seeing that are new but are going to make a big impact soon.
Do you mean what library I would like to see in the future?
Well, I mean, that's my next question. My first question is really like, maybe there's a new library on the block that you kind of want to give a shout out to and say like, this is a really great library, but nobody knows about it. Is there a library like that that you can think of?
I wouldn't say that in that situation I can call the library awesome, because only me is not enough to approve the library. Usually, I did it before when I just started, but now I don't know. Maybe I can recommend, if you look in something for the cryptography in a multi-platform way, there is a real good Kotlin cryptography. It's called. I don't remember, but it's a really. I don't want, but I think it's the best library for cryptography in the Kotlin multi-platform. It's a pure Kotlin library. It doesn't use native implementation. Maybe it is not good way for cryptography, but for this library, it's good enough. So maybe you have to try it.
I will be quite honest with you. When when the words cryptography and good enough appear next to each other in the same sentence, I do get a little bit nervous. One of the questions that I would have, especially given the context, like, yeah, there's a lot of libraries out there, and they maybe already solve a bunch of the problems that you might face on your journey of building something more complex with Kotlin multi-platform. They might even serve as references. I'm not sure. So my question here is, like, there's a lot of code out there. There's a whole bunch of people blogging out there. So again, if I'm in the process of saying I want to become a Kotlin multi-platform expert, where would you typically say you could get like more advanced information, like kind of to level up? Does that mean reading open source code? And like, is there something out there where you're like, oh, this is an amazing project, you should just read this and it gives you a pretty good idea? Are there like creators that you specifically follow? Do you dive into, I don't know, the compiler itself, for all I know? How do you approach this? I'm very curious.
There's definitely no wrong answer for somebody listening to this. I would say, me specifically, I absolutely copy so many things from so many repos. Whether it's just not remembering how to do something, but mostly there's almost always, especially at this point, early on, not so much, but anymore, there's almost always going to be somebody that has done something close to what you want. Whether it's a build configuration or interfacing with some native, platform API, native being sort of, not actually Kotlin native, but like a JavaScript API or an actual, Linux API or a new JVM API. It may not be exactly what you need, but usually you can pattern match on something that already exists. And the challenge really then becomes, can you find where that is? Certainly the Kotlin repo itself is just a limitless source of reference material for how to do really interesting Kotlin things. Whether it's, the expect actual stuff, and also the first party libraries. So like the datetime library does a lot of binding against crazy, not crazy, but wildly different APIs from each platform in order to abstract away the concept of datetime. Um, and so it's like a good reference to go look if you want to know. Or Kotlin XIO is sort of up and coming, and it also has a lot of bindings to very low level platform APIs. I would say I reference those to the actual Kotlin repo itself, coroutines for like a vast majority of my, I don't quite know how to do this. I know what I want from a concept, but I need to see somebody that's actually done, you know, interfacing with these Linux APIs or talking, defining my own representations of, new JavaScript APIs or, how to conditionally do things from JavaScript because I might be running in Node or the browser and I want to support that, which is something that like datetime and coroutines are doing. Um, that's the way that I can read a blog post 100 times and retain very little of it. I can probably watch a video a couple times and retain very little of it. I need to like get my hands on something that's tangible in code form, and then I could sort of manipulate it to be what I want, and that'll stick with me. And I don't have to necessarily remember it exactly, but the fact that it exists will allow me to, 6 months or 6 years in the future, be like, I remember doing that one time, and go find it again, and then just sort of continue the cycle of perpetuating these patterns and how to do, um, the harder things of Kotlin multi-platform.
I have to admit that puts my mind at ease a little bit because I think at least in the Kotlin community, you have a little bit of this also status of like a super duper hyperachiever. But it's very glad, or it makes me very glad to see um, that that doesn't mean that I need to start mental powerlifting by trying to remember all implementations from front to back, but that it's okay to look things up, and actually see what other people have done. Like prior art exists to help you, and I guess that's also a bit of the beauty of open source here, that you can look all of these things up.
Yeah, when I'm really into something, uh, the width of my tabs in my browser approaches like, approaches like 1 pixel because I'm just, hundreds of tabs and trying to find the things and reusing, the beauty of that, not only open source, but even just your own code. Um, the beauty of that is you can go and, if you do something once, you don't need to remember. I know. So a great tangible example is like, I never remember how to do Cartesian products. If you have like 2 lists and you want all the combinations, or you have like 10 lists and you want crazy number of combinations. Like I wrote that code once in Kotlin, and I'm sure I just derived it from some code that existed, in some other language. And all I have to do is remember where that code exists. I have to try. I don't have to remember how to do it. I just know that I know exactly where that file is in the Android X repo from 8 years ago, and I can just always go and copy that, and I don't have to, or anything like that. It's really just about sort of if you can find something that's close enough, that gets you 90% of the way there.
Great exercise for our listeners. If you're getting bored, try and find the Cartesian product implementation in the Android repo, I suppose.
Yep.
Tadeas, do you maybe
That's
have
the
to add
other
something?
side quest.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, exactly. uh, Tadeas, do you maybe have something to add here as well?
The one thing I think might be daunting for, especially for newcomers to KMP or someone who wants to like get more expertise and know more, is like when you're reading that code, you may not know exactly what it's doing. You may not know why it's doing that. So I would like to shout out the Kotlin Lang Slack channel, where you can reach out to, especially like you can reach out to authors of the code and ask them Of course, do try to research it first. Don't just go and DM everyone why did you implement something in a certain way. But it can be a great resource, and you can look at the history. Some people might be already looking into the stuff and chatting about the stuff that you're looking for. And honestly, blog posts I think kind of work for non-technical things a lot. For gonna plug Touch Labs blog posts, Kevin's especially, about the team structure, how to share the code between the iOS and Android team. That's something you don't necessarily get from reading a repo code, because that can differ between teams and it will differ for your team. So again, for those things, I personally prefer blog posts, but your mileage may vary.
John, I'll get to you in just a second, because I do want to hear from you. But I think it's worth reinforcing this just one more time. So the Kotlin Lang Slack is more than 50,000 people. It's an open community, so you could just get an invite and you can just join. And there's a whole lot of helpful people in there. And even I myself oftentimes find myself researching things there, like Command F and just like a specific little phrase, and then see that probably 3 months ago someone had the same brilliant idea that I just came up 3 months later. There's no such thing as an original thought, I suppose. And sometimes you have to realize that if you're really starting to dive into something, it might be the only option to ask somebody. The answer might not just be out there. You might be one of the first folks, and in those scenarios, the JetBrains people hanging out in those channels are oftentimes also just trying to help you, or they'll share with you a compiler flag that maybe wasn't even intended for external use, but is gonna help you explore this specific issue that you're trying to debug, or that you're trying to dig into. So the Kotlin Lang Slack really is the place to be.
And I just want to give a shout out to all the unsung heroes from Kotlin Lang for answering the tricky questions and helping us, just scale the community a little bit, or a lot.
Just wanted to say something, just building on something that Jake said there that I think is important. I get sort of feedback from people a lot that they find it very overwhelming, just the sheer amount of information that's out there, and the expectation maybe that you need to know all this stuff. And I mean, one of the things I think, as Jake said there, the key thing initially is to just know something exists, know that a certain capability exists, know that a certain library exists, a certain API, and not to get overwhelmed, not to feel that you have to know all those things and you have to know them in depth. Just to share, so that's a critically important kind of initial step for somebody. Not, as I said, not to get overwhelmed, just to sort of get that sort of feeling that, okay, at least I know that this capability exists. I know a way to find out at some point if I need to use it, and where to go when I do.
Exactly. So it's all about knowing where to go when you have a problem, or when you need an answer for something tricky. And the answer is most probably Kotlin Lang or John's samples, right? Um, but I wanted to get back to the KMP libraries and how people can get started with just adding to the ecosystem, and whether there is unexplored space in the KMP library ecosystem. Tadeas, and maybe following up, Kostya, what do you think? Is there unexplored space in KMP for library development?
I personally feel we need more iOS experts to join the KMP movement, so that we can build truly universal APIs and abstractions for a lot of the things that exist but don't necessarily have a good abstraction. Some of the things might not be possible to do right now, but we need the people to know and share that with JetBrains to maybe improve some of the Kotlin native when it's lacking. And then I also believe Kotlin JS, Kotlin Wasm being the next frontier, more like Kotlin Wasm probably being the next frontier for web. So having libraries that support it, so that we can give it a try. Look, I'm gonna shout out SQLite. There's an issue for Kotlin Wasm. SQLite, sorry about that. Where being able to use those libraries that already exist for those new platforms, or Kotlin Wasm, would open up like new samples, new tutorials, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree with Tadeas. We do really need iOS developers and ecosystem, and we need it in our team as well. We will be happy to have more iOS developers here. But regarding the lack of libraries, I would say I would be happy to have something good for the mapping here, because at the moment there is no library to have Google or some other map providers just plug and play into the Kotlin platform application. You have to wrap it with the native implementations. There is a lot of reasons why why it is, but yeah, I hope someone someday will do that. And maybe some kind of little bit different direction for the discussion is ecosystem needs more some useful tooling for that. Maybe for the new Gradle plugins for other ecosystems, maybe some special Gradle plugins for iOS builds, iOS publishing. I don't know, maybe for browser things with the Wasm as well. Maybe not only Gradle, some other tooling to, I don't know, to debug, to research applications, to help other developers to develop Kotlin platform applications. So
Yeah, so the opportunity to grow your skills doesn't mean, you only work on KMP applications at work. You can do samples like John. I mean, I think John, you in your previous at your previous job, you didn't necessarily have a KMP application which you're working on. Definitely now, but you were creating samples in your personal time, and you were growing your skills in that way. Library development is another great way to go ahead and develop your API creation skills, develop your KMP creation, developing that taste for what should be native and what should be written in common code. So don't disregard writing libraries as not cool. It's definitely very, very cool.
So on the subject of libraries, I did see recently, just as a quick follow up to Kostya, that in the OpenStreetMap community there's some buzz happening where they're seeing if maybe they can provide a compose multi-platform implementation for OpenStreetMap. I don't know what that will look like, whether they'll just wrap the native implementations that they already have for the tile rendering and what have you, since there's a whole lot of vector graphics going on there as well. But there's at least, it's picking up, and I mean, obviously now that there's also a bit of demand for it, I think there's an increased interest from the developers to also support this. Pamela already mentioned a couple of subjects here, but I'm curious if, I mean, I assume since all of you folks are already very deep into Kotlin, maybe you I'm not sure if you have a good answer, but I'll ask it anyway. Would you say there are any types of exercises, like little things that people can do? I don't know, the equivalent of maybe like katas to improve their taste when it comes to working in common versus platform specific, when it comes to designing their APIs, when it comes to figuring out the infrastructure bits of deploying things. Do you have any practical, like, maybe suggestions on how people might get started?
I have one exercise I can share that I really recommend everyone to open build scripts and read every line in a build scripts and try to explain what what it does. If you can, it's that okay, you are good enough as a Kotlin multi-platform expert.
You mean from their own project, or from like open a random project on GitHub and see if you can decipher every line?
No. I think no one can do that for some kind of no, for your own projects at least.
Yeah, and a shout out to Sebastian Sellmair, who created a really great line by line sort of run through of what all those different build.gradle.kts lines mean. So yeah, definitely have a look at his channel and have a look at his. I think it was Kotlin from scratch. Thanks, Seb.
We'll bring those up into the show notes as well. Anyone else have something that they like to do to keep themselves sharp, or that they remember from when they first sharpened themselves?
I would say a good one that's probably underutilized is really looking into the Kotlin enhancement proposals and how they meticulously go through sort of the requirements for what an API needs to handle, and take something that seems like it would be trivial. Like recent ones that come to mind are like the UUID stuff or the hex format. Ones that are more focused. I mean, we were talking about sort of like the API aspect of this, and so looking into proposals that were done for the standard library, because they really go through and sort of exhaustively explore the design space. I mean, if you look at Java enhancement stuff as well, like they also are really good at exploring the design space and then really whittling down the API into its sort of most primitive form so that it's both capable, but also not, it doesn't wind up in a place where you're like overly restricted in the future for either extension or um, building on top of. And so that, like, I don't have any, I've never been good at like references for, people that are just starting out for something like that. But that's certainly a place where you can look and see sort of the real world process that the basically the best of, well, we hope the best of the Kotlin community is doing to design the APIs that are sort of the most foundational that live in the standard library, and the process that they take, and sort of the things that show up, the things that they think of as they're going through sort of show up in that document as to like, oh, maybe I should start thinking about this aspect of how APIs are used in the future, and that really could teach you just the way to go through the process of how to think about building APIs.
And I think here probably just to kind of add the context here, so we recently added UUID as part of the Kotlin common like standard library, and I still remember, especially also when new language features were introduced, like for example context receivers. I personally didn't really have like a particularly deep understanding of what it enables or how it's supposed to be used. And I mean, what I really did is like I just read the proposal like 8 times until I was like, wait, this part still doesn't make sense. Okay, see if there's a part that explains it. Turns out 99 out of 100 times there is a part that explains it. um and just keep doing that until you've like developed once again like it, it makes it is a pretty good exercise to just sit down and try to understand what the considerations are that people put in. And the keeps make this pretty easy because, well, they just kind of spell it out.
So my last question really has to do with shout outs for other KMP experts. And who would you like, what would you kind of like to acknowledge them for? So just a shout out for maybe just one other expert, and what would you like to acknowledge them for?
I guess it's a hard one to pick. There's obviously a lot of people involved, particularly these days. But one person I'd have to call out would be Kevin Galligan. When I started looking into Kotlin Multiplatform in late 2018, as I mentioned before, we take for granted maybe a little bit how mature the ecosystem is now, but it took a while to get there. And back then, it was really people like him who were sort of actively pushing the ecosystem forward. And he continues to do so these days. So definitely would be Kevin.
Tadeas. You can't say Kevin.
You can't say Kevin too.
Yeah, I meant to
It
say
gets harder as it goes along.
yeah, I also meant to say Kevin. Then I'm probably gonna go with Russell Wolf and especially for his work at the multi-platform KMP multi-platform settings. That's the name. Library that was like one of the first libraries. I think that like really showed how to do common code, how to do native code, and was like one of the stepping stones for me when I got into KMP to learn how to do libraries, how to handle all of that. So I would say him.
I would say probably my coworker and friend Jesse Wilson, who is just a force of nature when it comes to building new stuff, especially with Kotlin Multiplatform. Certainly, no impediment is too large for Jesse. He's sort of, I feel like I receive people and I appreciate the praise that comes towards me. There's lots of people at Cache that work on multi-platform, and Jesse is one that is absolutely important and essential for all of that, and has contributed probably much more than people know to all of our offerings and stuff. And so he definitely deserves. He's not very visible on like Kotlin Lang, but on GitHub projects and certainly the impact. I mean, hell, all of Kotlin XIO is basically derived from Jesse Wilson's brain in the OKIO project. So we owe a lot to him.
I would recommend you to follow my colleague Sebastian, but another one, because for me it seems like he does really amazing thing with the Kotlin multi-platform, and maybe another developer. It's Salomon Brys, Brys, right? Brys. Yeah, because I remember his talks from Kotlin Conf about how to. He had a talk about interop stuff between ecosystems inside the Kotlin multi-platform, and for me, it was really it was deep dive to the technology.
Well, we have gone over time. If we imagine that we have a time limit. So with that, thank you so much for taking time out of your days to share some of this like super valuable and super in-depth knowledge of what it means to be a Kotlin multi-platform expert and what you can do to become a Kotlin multi-platform expert yourself. Because I think it's gotten pretty clear over the last hour-ish that it's worthwhile pursuing, right, Pamela?
Right. Thank you for all our panel members, and also thank you to you, Seb, for being an awesome side quester.
Oh, always a delight. And of course, we hope that you will join us in a future episode of Talking Kotlin. So I'll say once again, thank you so much for tuning in and take care. Bye bye, everybody.